Hello and welcome to Unshakeable with Lavelle Casero. I am so glad you have joined us today. I am excited to get started and introduce you to my next guest, Elaine Belson, and she is a self-authority coach and host of the Self-Authority podcast. She helps women who have a harsh self judgment of themselves and helps them to find self trust. She has over 30 years' experience as a psychotherapist and also has an interesting story of a pivot she made at 42 years old. So I can't wait for you to meet Elaine and hear her unshakable story. Let's get started.
I see faith through the pain. I see light in the rain. Dreams of brighter days. Tell me what you're thinking. I have hope in my spirit, flames of love in my heart. Baby, let me tell you something. I'm about to dance. You realize you're not in control. Once again, tell you once again.
Hello and welcome back to Unshakable with Lavelle Casero. So delighted to have my new friend and a very special guest today, Elaine Belson. As I said, Elaine has over 30 years as a licensed psychotherapist, and she works with women. So you all know that that is right up my alley of supporting and helping women overcome some of the challenges that they bear as a woman in life, in corporate, in many roles in which they serve. So welcome, Elaine. It's great to have you today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's delightful to be here.
Absolutely. Let's just talk a little bit about how you got into the work that you do now, which is such meaningful, purposeful work. I can't tell you how often I'm having conversations these days with young women who are saying, I love my job. I mean, I have a great job and, great benefits, but I just feel like there's something more purposeful out there. So every expert and has a personal story behind their work. So what experience in your life led you to find to execute on this as your purpose?
Well, it's interesting because I actually started out as a theater major at New York University, which is quite an elite program. And I was all about theater. I ate, slept, drank theater, right, up until that point. And then when I got there, I started to have some second thoughts. And one reason why was because we were fortunate enough to get professionals to come in and they would be interviewed in front of our class. So we had like Oliver Stone, the director, and Kevin Kline, the actor, and Wendy Wasserstein was a playwright. And we had this actress, her name is Jane Alexander. And she said something that stuck with me. And she said, if you have any doubts in your mind about doing this work, don't do it because it's that hard.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I actually went home that summer and decided not to come back. And then I took a Psych 101 class. And what I like to say is I fell in love with it because I really did. And the rest is history. So I got my bachelor's in psych, and then I went on eventually to get a master's in social work. And so, but what I do mostly is private, I have a private practice, so I do psychotherapy, and I also coach women as well.
What do you think the most significant challenge was that you personally had to overcome to be the woman that you are today?
Wow, that's a really good question. I have definitely evolved along the way with my clients. I remember one moment that was sort of an epiphany for me. I call it my Bed Bath and Beyond moment. I was coming out of the store, and as I'm sure a lot of women will relate to this, I was rehashing a conversation I had just had. And I don't remember now what it was, and that's usually the way it is, right? You know, a couple of days later, we've forgotten completely what it was we were ruminating over. But at the time, I caught myself and I said, "What am I doing?" And I realized that it was kind of like an addiction. Like I was afraid of not doing it. Like I felt compelled to rehash this conversation. And I realized that the reason why was because I was afraid that if I didn't rehash the conversation, that whatever I thought I did, quote unquote, wrong, I would repeat. And that was a really aha moment for me. And I realized that the reason why we overthink is a way of coping with fear of rejection and failure.
I would agree with that 100%. I mean, I experience that myself sometimes, 100%.
So I like to say that at that point, I got in my car and I said, I'm going to drive away and I'm never looking back. And that's kind of what I did from that moment on. Anytime I caught myself overthinking, I would stop and I would ask myself, okay, what am I feeling? Because that's what this is all about. It's really about coping with a fear.
Yeah, I was thinking and contemplating about this conversation today, and obviously, made some notes on some questions and things like that. But it is hard as even an accomplished woman. I feel like I have so much more to accomplish, and there are so many things I still want to do in this next journey in my life. And before my time on this earth is over, I have so many more things I want to accomplish. But when I look back, I've had a great career. I've had some moments where I thought I was going to be shaken and broken, but I've had such resilience and persistence. But I still go through those moments of self-doubt. And so how do you ever fully, I think you just have to have a tool or something, because I don't think it ever fully goes away. And I'm not the expert that you are on that, but I just look at myself and think, you should feel like you can do anything based on what you've done in the past and what you've been able to accomplish through adversity and all these other things. But it's still a thing, even with me, as accomplished as I am.
Yeah. Well, I think it has to do with a couple of things. I think that unfortunately we grow up in a society where we don't encourage people to learn how to cope with their emotions. And we get to a certain age where cognitively we start developing and we become, I think, overly reliant on our ability to reason as a way of managing our emotions. And so, one of the things that I'm sure you've heard of is the concept of emotional intelligence. And basically, what that is think of it like pain or hunger. If I touch a hot stove, I'm going to feel pain in my hand because if I didn't, I could burn my hand. If I don't eat for days, I'm going to feel hungry because if I didn't, I would starve myself to death. So we have emotions for the same reason. They are a survival response and they are information of a need or a threat that we're overlooking. And so what happens is that we have gotten away from tuning into our emotions as a way of figuring out, tuning into what's going on with us. And so that's, I think, where a lot of it comes from is that reliance on reasoning as a way of coping with emotions. And so one
Yeah,
of the things that I do when I work with clients is encourage them to learn how to use emotional intelligence.
and emotions are so taboo for us as women. Like whatever that emotion is, you're not supposed to get too angry, too too sad, too frustrated, too happy. I mean, you just, you have to, you feel like you have to temper. You're, when I was sharing your bio with the listeners today, one thing that you call it is self-trust, that you're helping women have self-trust. So help me understand, what is the difference between confidence and self-trust? Is there a difference?
Well, I think that self-trust is what breeds confidence. So, confidence is one of those catch-all words that can mean a lot of things. But when we're talking about self-trust, specifically what we're talking about is learning how to tune into yourself for the way that you make decisions, the way that you perceive yourself, the way that how you set boundaries, how you respond to when you make mistakes. So, you know, what often happens is with women is they second guess themselves. Either it's a decision or maybe it's just something that they did. And so what I encourage them to do is I call it the opposite of the golden rule. So what I say is that you have a right to be treated the way you treat other people. And
I
so
like that. I like that.
part
I
of
gotta write that down.
yeah, so yeah, so part of self-trust is learning to tune into that and saying, well, if the situation reversed, how would I be handling this, or how would I be treating somebody else in that situation? And if the answer is that you wouldn't be treating them the way they're treating you, then that tells you something, because what you're tuning into is your values. And then you have a decision to make. Do you want to live your life according to your values or somebody else's values? But
Wow.
self-trust
I
also
feel
comes from taking risks, getting outside our comfort zone. Um, because the more we do that and the more we realize that, the earth doesn't shatter beneath our feet when we do it, then we build trust in ourselves that way as well.
Yeah, I think I had another question, but I think you actually kind of touched on that question even before I asked it, because I was going to ask you why so many accomplished women still experience that self-doubt. As I shared, I do as well. But I think I think you helped me understand that. In fact, I feel like I'm getting a coaching session. So I love this. We may have to talk after this. But I guess where I would love to pull that thread a little bit further is when we are in a space of decision making, whether it's, as an entrepreneur, as a leader in a corporate role, as a, life decision, we tend to overthink the decision. So where's the balance between just, good discernment of the situation and getting to the overthinking? Because overthinking, in my experience, causes us to not be able to move forward. And so often as I'm rolling out new things and doing new things in this journey, I want perfection, and I keep checking it and testing it and rethinking it, and it's taking time away from launching it. So how do we balance that?
Right. So I think we need to separate overthinking from problem solving, right? Because with overthinking, you're not doing anything. You're just overthinking, right? You're mind reading, second guessing, anticipating, self-criticizing. So with problem solving, what you're doing is you're saying, what specifically is it that I'm feeling? Where is that feeling coming from specifically? And then what's in my control? And so that's the difference. You talked about
Yeah.
perfectionism. Perfectionism is a common way of avoiding feeling, of feeling that you're not good enough the way that you are. And so, I mean, that gets into this whole idea of what I call embracing your humanity, and learning to accept that you're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. But I think that there's a lot of fear in that and a lot of discomfort with it. And it's so complicated. I think I always say people are way more complicated than they give themselves credit for. So,
Well, I can relate to. I also think that some of it comes from your upbringing, and I share this often in that when I was working with my dad in the ministry, I would sing and in fact recorded a couple of albums when I was working with him. Albums, that's how long ago it was. Um, but, or CDs, I should say. But I was told and trained that you did not sing that song in public unless you had sang that song 100 times in practice. And that comes back to me sometime in that you were and perhaps my sister and I talk about this sometime too. Growing up as a preacher's kid, you're held to a higher standard of the way you act, the way you dress, the way you speak. And so, sometimes I think it's the learned behavior that we have as well. And I'm always psychoanalyzing myself when it comes to that, because I do recognize that some of that rises again. Talking about decisions though, you had a huge pivot in your life. I at least think it was huge. You having experienced it probably, I could never have done what you did, and I have no desire to be in the service, but I want to thank you for your service. And I just want to kind of think about when you were making that decision, was it like clear to you that this is where you wanted to be and what you wanted to do? Or did you experience some of the overthinking before you decided to join the Army at such a, late, not late, you were in your 40s, right? So, but most people have made that decision way before then, if that's going to be their career or their life. So talk about your decision to do that.
yeah, I know it seems out of the blue, but the consistency there is that I always wanted to be part of something bigger than myself and to have a bigger impact. I distinctly remember when I was younger thinking, the house with the white picket fence just doesn't do it for me. I I don't know. I just wanted to do more, be more, um, and um, and so it had happened by accident though, because we went to an air show. I live near Andrews Air Force Base, and we went to an air show, and I was seeing, all of these people with uniforms on, and I don't remember what it was about that, but it just sort of struck me in a certain way, and that's what planted the seed. And the more I looked into it, the more appealing it became, because it really appealed to that part of me.
Let me make sure I got that correct, though. I said Army. Did you join the Air Force or the Army?
No, it was the Army.
Oh,
It was
okay.
the
I thought
Army.
so. I just
Yeah,
wanted to make
no,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
I looked into joining the Air Force, but I was too old.
So going back to the decision, did you, because you were deployed, you were in Afghanistan. Did you think that would happen? Were you okay with if that happened? When you were making the decision, how did that play into the decision?
When we went through basic, and this was officer basic for medical professionals. So that's what I mean by basic. But we were told in no uncertain terms, it's not a question of if, it's when you will be deploying. So we were prepared for that. But the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that for a lot of service members, deployment is the easy part in the sense that for a lot of them, this is what they train to do. So when they get to deploy, they finally get to do their mission. Now, being in the medical field, I was a little more fortunate in that even when I was in garrison, home, I still got to do, the same kind of work. It's just, and still for service members, but also for civilians. But the other thing is that when you're deployed, all you have to do is your job, is your mission. You don't have to worry about, the kids and the bills and the house and all the other things, that the chores that need to be done. You don't have to worry about all that. And so in that respect, it's actually a lot easier for most service members to be deployed than it is when they're home.
Seems like though you don't really have a lot of downtime or off time. I know in my career in hospitality, I traveled 85% of the time. I was typically on the road 3 to 4 days a week, which feels like deployment sometimes. But I just felt like the time that I was traveling, I was always working. I was always on, even when you were going through an airport and catching, from one flight to another, going through security and all of that. That was part of your job and you were on all the time. Did you have that feeling? I know that it was a great experience for you because we've talked about the learning moments that you had in being handed responsibility that you really had never trained for, if you will, and until they trained you. But you talk about the learning moments that you had there, but did it just feel like you were constantly on your job, or was there ever any Elaine time?
Well, they do have some downtime, but yeah, I mean, you are kept busy, obviously, more so, and that definitely does help. I remember the first month, that was the hardest, getting adjusted. And I remember distinctly being in the tent and, just sitting in my bunk and looking at my daughter's picture and bawling. And I was like, what was I thinking? Because she was 5 years old at the time. But then, once that month passes and you get into this, the scheme of things, it goes by fairly quickly. And you mentioned something that happened to me was I was moved from Kandahar to Bagram and was put in the position of what's called executive officer, or XO for short, which is basically the person that handles supply, logistics, and procurement. And this was for the medical company that oversaw all of Afghanistan. So that's what I was. I was the XO for the medical company. And they had lost their XO. He had been put on some forward operating base, as they call it. So yeah, my first thought was, I don't know anything about any of this, right? I'm a social worker. But what I learned was that a lot of the same skills that I use as social work, interpersonal skills and problem solving and just being determined, were what helped me as an XO. And when I got the recommendation letter from my CO, my commanding officer, he said that I was more efficient, worked better than 99% of the people he's ever worked with, and
Oh,
that I
wow.
accomplished in 2 months what takes most people a year.
But as women, we do have very good organizational and tactical skills of managing a lot of things. So you know, so what is your advice for someone facing a major decision but waiting for absolute certainty?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I love telling that story, because I think we forget how much we really do know and accumulate just through experience. Even if you don't have specific knowledge of a subject matter, you have a lot of the abilities within you, and to trust that, and to also, if I hear this all the time too, just in terms of my own journey, because I'm, been a psychotherapist for so many years, and transitioning into doing more coaching. Um, that you have to start before you feel ready to start. If you wait until you feel ready, you're never going to do it. So you learn along the way. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you think about, again, going back to building self trust, that you have to get outside your comfort zone. And not to get too nerdy here, but that's the way the brain learns. It learns through experience. You can't talk your brain into, hey, brain, don't be anxious about this. It really, you have to kind of take the brain by the hand and say, hey, let's do this thing, and you'll see. That's how the brain learns, is through experience. So that term, that expression, get outside your comfort zone, really is, makes a lot of sense.
Again, I keep using myself as an example. And it was not my intention to do this today, but having just left a job that I served in for more than 30 years of my career, and I felt very. I realized after leaving that I really identified, my personal identity was very attached to that job. But I also realized, and I was a little bit scared of how my home life would be, because my husband and I had never really spent so much time together as it was going to be looking like we were going to spend, with me launching my own personal business. And I think, the process of the last 6 months has shown me that there was some, how do I want to say this? Because I had a wonderful career. I worked with great people. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, but the stress level was real. And you don't always realize what that great responsibility, lots of stress, busyness, long working hours. You don't realize how, when you're under the pressure, how much pressure you're really, I don't think you really feel the pressure as as it's bearing down on you. You're just working through it. But what mental challenges do you see most frequently among very high performers and executives that are, I like to say, on that hamster wheel?
Yeah. Well, the whole, one of the things that I hear all the time is, I'm really hard on myself. And I usually respond with, yeah, you and almost every person with two X chromosomes, which is my humorous way of normalizing it, because it's just that common. And I think there's this fear that if I'm not hard on myself, that I'm going to fall flat on my face, or I'm gonna, or nobody's gonna like me. And yet, and this gets back into, self-trust and self-authority, is we would never talk to somebody else that we care about the way that we talk to ourselves. And the difference is that when we're talking to other people, it's from a place of reason and values. But when we're talking to ourselves, it's from a place of fear and insecurity. So another one of my little techniques is I call, be your own best friend. So think about the way that you're talking to yourself. Imagine talking to somebody else that you care about the same way. And if you wouldn't, what would you say instead? So, because we know, I think instinctually, that it's not helpful to be hard on yourself. We know that when we're talking to somebody else, that the way to help them is to lift them up, or to be problem solving oriented and say, okay, well, what can you learn from this mistake? What do you want to do differently next time? We don't say, wow, that was really stupid. What were you thinking?
Exactly. Yeah. I that is such a great point. I remember it as a young leader when I was still on property in the hotel industry and had, was leading the one sales department, typically would have, depending on the size of the hotel, I would have, there'd be anywhere from 4 to 8 or 9 of us. And I remember I would always say to them, if I'm not here and you need to make a decision, make the best decision you feel. Make the decision you feel like is the best response to whatever the problem is. And if it wasn't the right decision, we'll learn from it. But to your point, there are so many times that I go back and check just one more time on that solution that I have prepared for something because, I'm doubting myself and feel like I need to check it just one more time instead of just letting it ride and seeing how it works out. So that's a great point that we do. I always say when it comes to grace that we will give other people grace so much quicker than we'll give ourselves grace. And so that's a great segue, if you will, to my follow-up question there is, in the work that you do I love your little sound bites that, be your own best friend. I love those little nuggets that you're throwing out there. But how much of the work that, someone like me would need to do, or someone that's, going through similar circumstance of lots of decisions to be made, life is changing significantly from what it has been like. How much is mindfulness and spirituality and prayer a part of that journey? And does it just depend on the person and where they are with that?
Well, I think, people have different concepts or different, I'm going to say different ways that they're inspired spiritually. So there's no question that that's important, and that they should rely on it. For some, that may be more spiritually in terms of, meditation or mindfulness. And for others, it might be more, based in, a certain faith, right? But what they all have in common is a couple of things. First of all, recognizing that you're just part of something, like there's this greater, world out there. And I think that can give you some perspective, especially when, we get caught up in the day to day and we forget that some of what we're going through, in the scheme of things, right, is small. I think that we also, because control is such an important part of, I think, being human. I joke that people are control freaks. I think we're all, as human beings, a little bit like control freaks. We don't like to feel out of control.
I am. Yeah.
And that's, so where does that come from? I think a lot of it comes from fear of, first of all, uncertainty, and not trusting yourself. And so sometimes, having a higher power kind of helps with that, dealing with that.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I definitely feel that as vulnerable as I have been today about some of the thoughts and things that I've faced over the last few months, but I have scriptures that I can go back to. And one of them I lean on quite a bit when I feel uncertain or afraid and fear tries to come in, as far as like the business part of it, like, growing the business and having a successful business to support my lifestyle and my family. And I always think about that verse in the Bible where he talks about feeding the birds of the air and the lilies don't toil. And I can look at nature and say, okay, all right, God, if you got all this, like if you know where that little rabbit in my backyard this morning is right now, you certainly know where I am. And so I lean on my faith-based background so often in that, and don't know what I would do without it. So I agree with you that everyone has a different experience with that and a different relationship with that and a different practice with that. But I just encourage people to have something like that you can lean on when times get tough. Because as it also says in the Bible, trouble is going to come, and trials and tribulations are part of living in this world. But Jesus said, I have overcome the world. So I try to lean on those teachings and know that those promises are as true today as they are when they were written before. Before we start wrapping up this awesome conversation, I first of all would love for you to tell us how, if someone would be interested in you as a coach, in talking to you about getting your services, tell us how we can find you. We'll be sure to put that information into the transcript of the podcast for people to get. But also, you have a podcast, and I want you to talk a little bit about that. So, how can we find you? What is your website? And then tell us about the podcast.
Right. So easy to remember. My podcast is called The Self-Authority Podcast, and my website is called The Self-Authority Coach, which is what I call myself. And so it all centers around this concept of self-authority, which, interestingly enough, when I first came up with it, I looked it up in the dictionary and it's not there. So yeah, but it's something that we talk about. We talk about it and around it. We just don't necessarily know what to call it. And that was kind of how I came to think of self-authority. It was, I started with, I have all these ideas floating in my head, and what to call it. So yeah, so I have a podcast that I just started this month, and there's already a couple episodes out there, and you can find it on Apple or Spotify or YouTube. And then my website, if you're interested in coaching services, is theselfauthoritycoach.com. And again, the podcast is the Self-Authority Podcast.
That's awesome, Elaine. Oh, yeah, it is very easy. And that is interesting because we have some of those buzzwords out there that probably either aren't in the dictionary or they're in the dictionary, but we use them in such a different way. And, it's even like mindfulness and things like that. I mean, it's interesting how we start leaning into those kind of cultural sayings, if you will. It's been a pleasure to have you on here today, and I'm in awe of your expertise in the subject matter and all the great takeaways that I experienced personally, and I know the audience will as well. But in closing, I just have I always ask every guest, do you have any parting words or whatever? But if someone is listening today
and feels trapped by their own self-doubt, overwhelmed by expectations, or unsure whether they can trust themselves, what would you want them to remember before we end this conversation?
So remember that all of that is what I call chocolate cake. So when we're feeling uncomfortable, or if we're feeling some emotional discomfort, let's put it that way, we will reach for the self-doubt, the mind reading, second guessing, comparing ourselves to others, over analyzing, self-criticizing. We reach for all of that. And I'm sure a lot of people are like nodding their head, yeah, I do that, because I hear that all the time. We do that as a way of coping with emotional discomfort. And ask yourself 3 things. Specifically, what am I feeling? Where is this coming from? Or what is making me feel this way? And it's important to be specific about it. So if you're like feeling overwhelmed because you have a lot going on in your life, what specifically is overwhelming you? And go into the details, because the third step is what's in my control. And so by identifying the specifics, then you can start problem solving and saying, okay, well, what do I want to do about the fact that, I don't feel like I'm spending enough time with my daughter and I feel like a bad mom? What specifically, if I feel like the house is disheveled, and, what is it that I'm thinking that I need to do, and how can I, find balance in those things? So, and that's what I mean by tuning into your emotions and relying on your emotions.
I love that. So I wrote down 3 words: feeling, source, control. So what am I feeling? What is the source of that? And is it within my control? In other words, what can I truly do about it? And oftentimes I can think, I have so many examples running through my head that when you get to the source, it's usually, for me, and especially the examples that are running through my head, is that the source is coming from an external source of, and not always, of course, but, it's especially, someone that hasn't called you recently, and just different things like that come to mind. But the other thing, and you said it beautifully, and I'll never articulate it as beautifully as you did, but I do feel I'm constantly trying to control the outcome. And I think that's been the best step that I have taken through this journey, is just total surrender. And again, I go back to my faith background, and that totally surrendering the future and the outcome doesn't mean that I'm sitting here just, letting life happen to me, but I am trusting the process, because I know who's in charge of the process. Have to remind myself of that quite often when I start trying to control. But you've been an amazing guest today. I thank you so much for joining in. I can't wait. Congratulations on starting the Self-Authority podcast. So thank you again for joining us today. And until we meet again, I want to encourage you to be safe, be well, be loved, but most of all, be you. God bless you.
I see fate through the pain. I see light in the rain. Dreams of brighter days. Tell me what you're thinking. I have hope in my spirit, flames of love in my heart. Baby, let me tell you something. I'm about to dance. You realize you're not in control. Once again, tell you once again.